Welcome to White Mountains Today. I'm Wendy Howell. If you've ever visited the White Mountains, you are very familiar with the Swift and the Saco River. Joining me today is Mark Dindorf, and you are representing the Rivers and Lakes Management Program, yep. Excuse me, and you are part of the local advisory committee for the Swift and Saco Rivers.
That's correct. I do chair that committee.
Good. Thank you for being here with us, first of all.
It's my pleasure.
So you're a very busy person with the Swift and the Saco River, and you're working on a new corridor plan, is that correct?
That's correct. It's a corridor management plan for the two river corridors within the state of New Hampshire. Okay. And the corridor is defined as a quarter mile from the high water mark of the river or the furthest extent of the floodplain, whichever is greater.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll let you explain a little bit about what the advisory committee is for, because I'm learning about it myself. So why don't you share a little bit of information about that first?
Sure. So the Saco and Swift Rivers Local Advisory Committee is part of the New Hampshire's Lakes and Rivers Management Program. And both the Saco River and the Swift River are designated as protected rivers. And as such, one of the things that they require is an updated corridor management plan, which is a uniform guidance document to guide municipalities and permitting officials in consistent decisions regarding development and permitting within the river corridors. Our local advisory committee is made up of appointed representatives from the individual municipalities, and we have representatives from Conway and Albany, Bartlett, Madison, and the White Mountain National Forest, also Jackson, are all part of our local advisory committee. And one of the things that we do is we provide local knowledge and insight to help inform Department of Environmental Services reviewers when they are reviewing a project that might have an impact to the river corridors, whether it's a wetlands permit or an alteration of terrain permit, anything that could potentially adversely affect the rivers and their resources and qualities. The local advisory committee has a chance to review those plans, to provide our knowledge and insights as points of consideration for the Department of Environmental Services reviewers as they make their final decisions.
Interesting. And so what is the corridor management plan that you're working on currently?
So we are working on a corridor management plan for both the Saco and the Swift rivers within the state of New Hampshire. And the corridor management plan, essentially, its purpose is to first ascertain the values that the river stakeholders appreciate the most or care about the most, and then also the threats to those values. And so this has been a lengthy process, and we're soon to be releasing the draft corridor management plan and then launching a public input phase where stakeholders to the rivers, community members, et cetera, will have an opportunity to share their input on what they consider to be the important values and threats to those values.
All right.
Yeah. And then ultimately, the plan, the final draft of the plan, will be shared with each of the corridor municipalities. They'll be given the opportunity to adopt it. If they choose, they can include it in their master plans. And otherwise, it's a resource for local governing officials to make, hopefully, wise decisions that are consistent with the values that we've identified as a larger community.
Sure. What are some of the threats that you find that are, in no particular order, that are affecting the rivers?
Sure. I think the draft plan has established a few primary threats, and there are certainly several, but flooding is certainly one of them, especially with climate change and increased amounts of precipitation. And we've seen some pretty major flooding events in the last 10 or 12 years. Hurricane Irene and the October 17 Halloween storm in particular, represented some severe flooding, especially on the Upper Saco and on places along the Swift River. So flooding is one. Development is another one. recreational overuse is one that we've become increasingly aware of, and that local residents have pointed out their concerns about. Water quality and water quality degradation is a primary concern. As our population in this region grows, there are many people throughout the entire length of the Saco River who depend on the Saco River and its aquifers to provide, clean drinking water.
Yeah.
And so, we're very concerned about water quality degradation, things such as, non-point source pollution, and also riverbank erosion. As the flooding has occurred and as development has occurred, some of the impacts of that flooding and that development have caused erosion that contributes also to water quality degradation as you get more sediment and suspended materials transported in the rivers.
Absolutely. Do you have any plans or ideas in place to resolve some of these issues?
Well, that's a big part of the reason why we're doing this plan. Is the best way to manage these issues is first to identify them and prioritize them, and then to look for ways that they can be addressed. And so, this document will serve to guide permitting officials in the local communities within the National Forest, and also at the state level at the Department of Environmental Services, so that we can find ways to address the concerns that are identified.
Good. You mentioned public feedback and that it is out there, or there's a place where people can go to give their feedback. Where do they access that?
Sure. So there's a couple of places that you can access it, and I did bring in a copy of the QR code that I hope that you'll append to this broadcast at some point. But we also have a website. It's newly being developed, but it's sacoswift.org, and that is the website where both a copy of the draft management plan will be hosted, but also where you can link to the public input survey. And we discussed at length the benefits of having a series of public forums or public meetings, but ultimately we thought that we might be able to get a broader reach and a broader cross-section of the demographics and the stakeholders of the river if we were to host a public input survey with targeted questions specifically related to both the values of the river and then the threats to the river. And then that public input period will be open between now and May 18th.
Okay.
And then that public input will be incorporated into the final draft of the plan, which will then be released to the corridor towns.
Okay. And what's the date for something like that, when that plan comes out to the towns?
Well, we hope to have that happen later this summer, and certainly into the fall. Our funding project period runs out later this year, so we hope to complete the entire project this year.
Good. And I want to talk about the funding for a minute. You were telling us about a program that you were aware of through other organizations that you're part of. I think that's a really wonderful program that you introduced the Swift River and Saco River with. So will you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So funding for this project is coming from the State of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And one of the different roles that I hold is I chair the Board of Selectmen in Hart's location, and I've had previous involvement in other conservation organizations where we've looked for funding resources to support projects that incorporate planning for water quality, water protection. And we had been made aware of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and they have a program that basically will fund a planning project like this with a loan from that fund. And then once the project is complete and all of the scope of work tasks have been completed, the state then forgives the loan principal, and then the funding receiver, in this case it was the town I'm from, the town of Hart's location, we applied for and received the funds. We will have that loan principal forgiven, and we'll just owe the interest on the
That's
funds
excellent.
during that period of time. So
These things are not inexpensive,
no,
you know.
it's not. And this has been going on a 2-year process now,
Yeah.
and it's been a very comprehensive process. Folks who are interested in studying and reviewing the plan, should be prepared to see a pretty lengthy document. It's
Yes.
close to 100 pages in length.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, for all of us who live here, for all of us who vacation here, we certainly appreciate the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate the opportunity to share what we're doing with a broader audience, and I hope that the viewers will take advantage of the opportunity to participate in the public input survey. Again, you can go to our website at sacoswift.org to both review the draft corridor management plan and follow a link from there to the survey itself.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Wendy. Thank you.
You're watching White Mountains Today.